There's a certain sound a house makes when the life has gone out of it. It's not a loud sound, not a crash or a bang. It's the quiet hum of the refrigerator after everyone's gone to bed. It's the soft, lonely tick of the grandfather clock in the hall, measuring out seconds that feel like hours. It's the sigh the floorboards give when you're the only one walking on them. I became an expert in those sounds. I used to think this house, this beautiful, sprawling home with its manicured lawn and hydrangea bushes I planted with my own hands, was my sanctuary. Quick pause. Before we continue, tell us where in the world are you watching from? If you're enjoying these stories, make sure to hit subscribe, because tomorrow's episode is absolutely mind-blowing. It took me 28 years to realize it was just a very pretty cage. My name is Ruth. I'm 53 years old, and this is the story of how I learned to stop being a ghost in my own life. It all started, as these things often do, on a day that seemed utterly ordinary. The sun was streaming through the bay window of our kitchen, catching the dust motes dancing in the air like tiny, misplaced fairies. I was wiping down the marble countertops, a habit born of 3 decades of making a home for Mark, for our son David, for anyone who crossed the threshold. The coffee was brewing, its rich, bitter scent a small, daily comfort, and Mark was at the table, scrolling through his phone, his reading glasses perched on the end of his nose. He looked every bit the successful, settled man he was, a little gray at the temples, a certain firm set to his jaw that hadn't been there when we were young. "Big day today, dear?" I asked, my voice deliberately light. I poured him a cup of coffee, the way he liked it, 1 sugar, a splash of cream, and set it beside his elbow. He didn't look up. "Board meeting at 10. Then lunch with the investors from Cincinnati. Don't wait up, it'll likely run late." "Of course," I murmured. I didn't say that I never waited up anymore. I'd be in bed by 10, reading, and would only know he'd come home by the faint smell of cigar smoke and expensive whiskey on his clothes in the morning. I stood there for a moment, my hand resting on the cool marble, waiting for him to say something else. To ask about my day. To comment on the article I'd left for him about the new community garden project I was hoping to volunteer with. Anything. The silence stretched, filled only by the tap-tap-tap of his thumb on the screen. This was our normal. This was the foundation upon which our life was built. And for the longest time, I told myself it was enough. He worked hard, he provided this beautiful life. My role was to maintain it, to be the steady, quiet force in the background. The homemaker, the nurturer, the wife. I turned back to the sink, my gaze drifting out to the garden. The hydrangeas were a stunning, almost unnatural blue this year. I remembered planting them, years ago, when David was just a toddler, his chubby hands patting the dirt around the roots. Mark had been there too, holding David back from trampling the new plants, laughing. He had a real laugh then, one that started deep in his belly and reached his eyes. When did that laugh disappear? I couldn't pinpoint the exact moment. It had been replaced by a sort of perfunctory chuckle, a social nicety that never touched the steely gray of his irises. The phone in my apron pocket vibrated, pulling me from my thoughts. I saw the name on the screen, and a genuine smile touched my lips for the first time that morning. "Auntie Grace." I answered, turning slightly away from Mark, though I knew he wasn't listening. "Grace, hi. Ruthie, my darling." I was just sitting here with my tea, and a thought popped into my head. You know how Clara says I have a mind like a runaway train? Well, this one was about you. I could hear the smile in her voice. Grace was my mother's younger sister, all soft edges and warm, open-hearted emotion. Where my mother had been pragmatic, Grace was a romantic. She'd never married, claiming she was waiting for a love that felt like a symphony, not a convenience store transaction. "And what was this thought?" I asked, leaning against the counter. "I was thinking about that little bakery you love so much, the one with the almond croissants down on Maple Avenue. Do you remember? You and Mark used to go there on Saturday mornings when you were first married." A pang, sharp and sweet, went through me. I remember. I could almost smell the yeast and sugar, feel the warmth of Mark's hand in mine as we walked down the street, our shoulders bumping, talking about nothing and everything. Well, I drove past there yesterday, and it's gone, Ruthie, turned into one of those cold-pressed juice places. All white tiles and people who look like they've never enjoyed a carbohydrate in their lives. It just made me sad. It made me think. Things change, don't they? Even when you don't want them to. I swallowed, my eyes drifting back to Mark, still absorbed in his digital world. Yes, Grace. They do. We chatted for a few more minutes about her book club, about the ache in her knee predicting rain, about nothing of consequence and everything that mattered. It was a lifeline, that conversation. A reminder that I existed outside of this kitchen, that someone saw me, heard me. After I hung up, the silence in the kitchen felt heavier, more profound. Who was that? Mark asked, not looking up. Grace. Just checking in. He made a non-committal sound. She needs to find a hobby. Or a man. All that free time leads to too much thinking. I felt a flash of heat in my cheeks. She was just being kind, Mark. He finally looked up, his gaze cool and appraising. There's a difference between kindness and having nothing better to do, Ruth. She's lonely. It's pathetic. He took a sip of his coffee. This is a bit bitter. Did you use the new beans? And just like that, the moment was over. The defense of my dear aunt was swept aside, and we were back to the critique of the coffee. This was the dance. A subtle put-down, a dismissal of something I cared about, followed by a minor criticism. It was so small, so seemingly insignificant, that to protest would make me seem hysterical. So I just nodded. I'll try a different grind tomorrow. He gave a curt nod and went back to his phone. The conversation was closed. Later that afternoon, the house was truly empty. Mark was at his board meeting, and the silence was my only companion. I decided to tackle a project I'd been putting off for years, the attic. It was a tomb of our past lives, filled with boxes of David's childhood artwork, old photo albums, my wedding dress sealed in a box, a ghost of the girl I used to be. The air was thick and hot, smelling of dust and cedar. Sunlight streamed through a single, grimy round window, illuminating the floating dust in thick, golden shafts. I wasn't looking for anything in particular. Maybe just a distraction. Maybe a connection to a time when things felt simpler. I found a box labeled Mom's Things in my own, younger handwriting. My mother had passed away 5 years ago, and I'd shoved her belongings up here, the grief too fresh to sort through them. Now, with a strange pull in my chest, I lifted the lid. On top was a familiar, faded velvet scarf, the color of crushed violets. I brought it to my face and inhaled, a foolish hope that her scent, a mix of Jean Nate and cinnamon, might still linger. It was just dust. Beneath it were photo albums, her favorite porcelain teacup wrapped in newspaper, a stack of letters tied with a faded ribbon. And then, at the very bottom, something I didn't recognize. A small, lockable metal strongbox, the kind you'd keep important documents in. It wasn't heavy. I shook it gently, and something shifted inside with a soft, rustling sound. The lock was small but sturdy. I had no key. What could my mother, a schoolteacher who lived a life of quiet, modest means, have? I needed to lock away. A shiver, completely at odds with the stifling heat of the attic, ran down my spine. It felt like a secret, a message from the past. I decided to take the box downstairs, to look at it later. Perhaps the key was hidden somewhere else in her things. I was carrying the box down the attic stairs, my mind 1,000 miles away, when I heard the front door open and close. Mark was home early. His voice carried down the hall, and I realized he wasn't alone. He was on the phone, his tone relaxed, almost jovial. It was a tone he never used with me anymore. I froze on the bottom step, the attic door slightly ajar, hidden in the shadows of the hallway. No, don't worry about that, he was saying, laughing. A real laugh. It stopped me cold. It's handled. It's always handled. Yes, the numbers look good. Better than good. No, Ruth has no idea. Why would she? It's not like she'd understand the intricacies of the market. Her world is the garden, and whatever novel she's buried in this week. He paused, listening. I held my breath, my fingers tightening on the metal box. A burden? He said, and the word landed like a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. No, that's too strong a word. It's more, a responsibility, a permanent one. You know, when you buy a purebred dog, you commit to taking care of it for its whole life. You don't get rid of it when it gets old and can't do tricks anymore. It's just there. You feed it, you keep its bed clean, you make sure it doesn't make a mess. That's the commitment you made. I felt the blood drain from my face. The hallway seemed to tilt. A purebred dog. An old dog that couldn't do tricks. A responsibility, a burden. He laughed again, a cruel, sharp sound I didn't recognize. Exactly. A very expensive, very well-kept pet. But what can I do? It's the life I chose. Look, I've got to run. I'll see you at the club at 7, we'll celebrate. The call ended. I heard his footsteps retreating towards his study. I stood there in the semi-darkness for a long time, maybe minutes, maybe only seconds, I don't know. The metal box felt cold and heavy in my hands. The words echoed in my head, on a loop, each repetition carving a little deeper into my soul. A burden, a permanent responsibility, an old dog. Tears didn't come. Not then. There was just a vast, hollowing emptiness. A numbness that started in my chest and spread outwards, chilling my fingers and toes. This house, this marriage, this life I had meticulously built and maintained. It was a lie. The foundation wasn't just cracked, it was pure, shifting sand. And I was sinking. I finally moved, walking on legs that felt like wood, back to the kitchen. I set the metal box on the counter. The sun had moved, and the room was now in shadow. The beautiful, gleaming kitchen felt like a stage set, a prop. I picked up the phone, my movements slow and deliberate. I dialed a number I knew by heart. It rang twice before a voice, crisp and clear, answered. Ruth, what is it? You only call at this time if something's wrong. It was Auntie Clara, my mother's older sister, the wise one. The blunt one, the one who had never liked Mark. I opened my mouth to speak, to tell her what I'd heard, to pour out the pain and the humiliation. But all that came out was a strangled whisper, the only truth I could grasp in that moment. Clara, I said, my voice trembling, I think I need a key. The human heart is a stubborn organ. It doesn't want to believe the worst. It will concoct 1,000 excuses, paint over cracks with the prettiest colors, just to maintain the illusion of wholeness. For 3 days after I heard Mark's words, my heart did just that. It was a master of deception. He was stressed, it whispered to me in the quiet of the night. The board meeting must have gone poorly. He was just blowing off steam with a friend. Men talk like that sometimes. It doesn't mean anything, it was just words. But another part of me, a part that had been sleeping for decades, was waking up. It was a colder, harder thing. It didn't listen to the whispers. It just replayed the scene, the shadowed hallway, the casual cruelty in his laugh, the utter finality of the word burden. That part of me started looking at my life through a new, unforgiving lens. The metal box from my mother sat on the shelf in my walk-in closet, hidden behind a stack of sweaters. It was a tangible secret, a silent question mark in my life. I'd searched through all my mother's other things, every envelope, every pocket of her old purses, but I hadn't found a key. The mystery of it was a strange anchor. While my world felt like it was dissolving, the box was solid, real. It was Auntie Clara who broke the spell of my denial. She arrived on my doorstep on the 4th day, unannounced, which was her way. She stood there, A tall, imposing woman in her late 70s, her silver hair cut in a severe, elegant bob, her eyes missing nothing. "Ruth," she said, not as a greeting but as a statement of fact. She held out a paper bag from a local deli. "I brought pastrami. You look like you haven't eaten." I hadn't. I'd been moving through my days like an automaton, cooking Mark's meals, cleaning the house, all while feeling like I was watching someone else play my part in a dull, depressing play. I let her in, the scent of rye bread and spicy mustard cutting through the sterile lemon-scented air of the house. She marched straight to the kitchen, familiar with the territory, and started pulling plates from the cupboard. "Sit," she commanded. I Saturday. She made 2 sandwiches with an efficiency that brooked no argument and set one in front of me. Then she sat opposite me, her sharp eyes fixed on my face. She didn't say a word, she just waited. Clara had a way of wielding silence like a surgical instrument. She would wait until you couldn't stand it anymore. Until the truth just spilled out to fill the empty space. I picked at the crust of the bread. "The garden is doing well. The hydrangeas." "I didn't come to talk about hydrangeas, Ruth," she interrupted, her voice low and steady. "You called me 3 days ago. You said you needed a key. Your voice sounded fractured. Now, you look like a ghost who's forgotten how to haunt. So, you will eat that sandwich and then you will tell me what has happened." So, I told her. The words came out in a halting, broken stream. The attic, the phone call, the words burden, permanent responsibility, old dog. I kept my eyes on my plate, unable to meet her gaze, shame heating my cheeks. To say it out loud was to make it real, to confirm that I was the pathetic creature he described. When I finished, the silence returned. I finally dared to look up. I expected to see pity in her eyes, or perhaps rage at Mark. But I saw neither. I saw a deep, cold understanding. She took a slow sip of the water she'd poured for herself. "I see," she said, setting the glass down with a precise click. "So, the mask has finally slipped." "The mask?" "The man you married was a carefully constructed facade, Ruth. A promising young man with good prospects and nice manners. But underneath, well, your mother and I saw it. A certain entitlement. A coldness. But you were in love, and love is the world's most effective blindfold." "Why didn't you say anything?" I whispered, a flicker of anger cutting through the numbness. "We did," she said simply. "Your mother gently. Me less so. You were 25. You would not have listened. You had to live it to believe it. And now, you have." She leaned forward, her elbows on the table. "The question is, what are you going to do now that you can see?" I don't know." The admission was terrifying. "What can I do? This is my life." "Is it?" she countered. "This house, this routine of servitude. Is this the life Ruth Ellen Morrison dreamed of when she was that bright, fiery girl who wanted to travel the world and write about it?" Hearing my maiden name was like a jolt of electricity. Ruth Ellen Morrison. She felt like a stranger to me now. "That was a long time ago, Clara." "It was yesterday," she said fiercely. "Don't let him convince you otherwise. A burden." She practically spat the word. "He wouldn't have a career, a reputation, or this house if it weren't for you. Who managed every dinner party, every social connection, who raised his child, who kept his home running so seamlessly he never had to think about a single domestic detail, who provided the emotional labor he's too stunted to even recognize. He is the burden, Ruth, a dead weight around your spirit." Her words were a battering ram against the walls of my self-doubt. I felt a crack, a tiny sliver of light. "The key you asked for," she said, changing tack. "What does it open?" I told her about my mother's strongbox. Clara's eyebrows rose slightly. Eleanor was full of surprises. She was always the quiet one. "Find the key. Secrets from the past have a funny way of informing the future." She stood up, brushing crumbs from her slacks. "In the meantime, You need to start seeing things as they are, not as you've convinced yourself they are. Watch him. Listen. Not with the ears of a hopeful wife, but with the eyes of a strategist. Your survival depends on it. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time. So, if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. After she left, the house felt different. It was no longer just my cage, it was my field of study. Clara was right. The mask had slipped, and now that I had seen what was underneath, I couldn't unsee it. The first test came that Friday. David was coming for dinner with his new girlfriend, Chloe. I'd spent the day cleaning, cooking, arranging flowers, performing the perfect homemaker role with a new, detached awareness. It felt like I was an actor, preparing for a play. Mark came home from work, earlier than usual. He seemed in a good mood, almost expansive. He poured himself a scotch and came into the kitchen. "Smells good in here," he said, and for a fleeting second the old treacherous hope flickered. "See," he's noticed, "things are fine." "It's just the pot roast," I said, my voice carefully neutral. David called. He and Chloe are running a bit late. Traffic on the 405. He took a sip of his drink, leaning against the counter, watching me. He says she's nervous. Wants to make a good impression. "There's no need to be nervous," I said, stirring the gravy. "Well, for you, maybe. But I'm the one he really wants to impress." He puffed out his chest slightly. The boy always sought my approval. The boy was a 30-year-old architect. But I said nothing. I was watching, listening. The strategist. When David and Chloe arrived, the house filled with a different energy. David, with his father's jawline but my eyes, hugged me tightly. "Hey, Mom. The place looks great." Chloe was lovely, a bit shy, with an intelligent gaze. She complimented the flowers. We sat down to dinner. The conversation was light, easy. David talked about his project, a new sustainable library. Chloe was an environmental lawyer, and she spoke passionately about a case she was working on. I was captivated, asking her questions, seeing a version of a life I might have had. Mark, however, grew quieter. He listened to David with a faint smile, but when Chloe spoke, his attention seemed to wane. He'd check his phone or refill his wine glass. Then Chloe, trying to include him, asked, "And what about you, Mr. Walker? David says you're in finance. It must be a high-pressure world." Mark gave her a patronizing smile. "It is, but it's a world of real consequences, not like some of these touchy-feely professions." He gestured vaguely with his fork. "It's about numbers, bottom lines. Ruth, for instance," he said, turning the spotlight on me, and my skin prickled. "She lives in a world of fiction and flowers. A much simpler existence. Isn't that right, dear?" The air went out of the room. David looked down at his plate, uncomfortable. Chloe's smile became fixed. The old me would have laughed it off, made a self-deprecating comment, smoothed it over. But the new me, the one who had heard the word burden, just looked at him. I saw it clearly. Now it wasn't a joke. It was a diminishment, a way of establishing the hierarchy. I deal with the real world. She deals with trifles. I set my fork down. It has its complexities, I said, my voice quiet but clear. Managing a household budget, for one. Understanding the nuances of human relationships, for another. They're just a different set of numbers and consequences. The silence that followed was profound. Mark's smile tightened. He wasn't used to being countered. David looked up at me, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. "Mom's the real brains behind the operation," David said, trying to rescue the moment. "She's the one who actually reads the fine print on my contracts." Mark's laugh was a short, harsh bark. "I'm sure she finds it very entertaining. Like a crossword puzzle." The rest of the dinner passed in a strained politeness. After dessert, David and Chloe made a hasty retreat. I walked them to the door. "I'm sorry about your father," David murmured, hugging me goodbye. "He's just in a mood." "It's okay, sweetheart," I said, but my voice was distant. I was already disconnecting. When the door closed, I turned to face the quiet house. Mark was already in his study, the door firmly shut. The performance was over. I went to the kitchen and started cleaning up. The clatter of plates was the only sound. My hands were shaking. I had stood my ground, just a little, and the sky hadn't fallen. But the cost of that small act felt enormous. Later, as I was getting ready for bed, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Grace. "How was dinner with David and the new girl? I've been thinking about you all evening. Tell me everything." And then, a moment later, a separate text from Clara. "Did you watch?" I stood in my walk-in closet, in my silk nightgown, that Mark had bought me because it was what a successful man's wife should wear. I looked at the shelf, at the lump in the sweaters that was my mother's box. 2 messages, one of warmth and connection, one of cold, hard strategy. I needed them both. I texted Grace back first. "Chloe is lovely, intelligent and kind. David is smitten." I left out the rest. She would only worry. Then I texted Clara. A single word. Yes, I didn't need to say more. She would understand. The unraveling had begun. The threads of my old life were loosening, and I was no longer trying to hold them together. I was just watching, waiting to see what pattern would be left when they finally fell apart. And in the back of my mind, a single, persistent thought began to form. I had to find that key. There is a peculiar madness that comes from living a double life. On the surface, I was still Ruth Walker, wife of Mark, keeper of the pristine home, waterer of the hydrangeas. I made his coffee, 1 sugar, a splash of cream. I listened with a placid face as he talked about market fluctuations and incompetent junior partners. I was a still pond, giving back the reflection he expected to see. But underneath the surface, a torrent was raging. Every casual dismissal, every patronizing remark, every time he called me dear, in that tone that felt less like an endearment and more like a label for a simpleton. It was another stone tossed into the water, rippling out, disturbing the false calm. I was no longer just hurt, I was angry. A deep, slow-burning, tectonic anger that was shifting the very bedrock of who I was. My focus became the box, my mother's secret. It was my rebellion, my anchor, my obsession. While Mark was at the office, I would retreat to my walk-in closet, close the door, and take the metal strongbox down from its hiding place. I would run my fingers over its cool, pitted surface, tracing the small, stubborn keyhole. It became a ritual, a meditation. What could my quiet, unassuming mother have possibly locked away? Love letters from a man who wasn't my father? A diary filled with her own silent rebellions? Or was it something less romantic, old stock certificates, a forgotten savings bond? The not knowing was a kind of torture, but it was also a gift. It forced my mind to work, to puzzle, to engage with a mystery that was entirely my own. It was the first thing that had been wholly mine in decades. A week after the disastrous dinner with David, I found myself standing in the middle of the living room, a feather duster in my hand, staring at a porcelain shepherdess on the mantelpiece. Mark had bought it on a business trip to London. I hated it. I hated its vapid smile, its frilly dress, its pointless existence as a decorative object. In a sudden, impulsive surge of that new, raw anger, I imagined sweeping it off the mantel, watching it shatter into 1,000 dusty pieces on the marble hearth. The violence of the thought shocked me. My hand trembled. I took a deep breath, set the duster down, and walked away from the shepherdess. I needed to get out of the house. I ended up at a small, independent hardware store across town, a place with creaky wooden floors and the smell of metal and pine. A bell jingled over the door. An old man with kind eyes and gnarled hands looked up from behind the counter. "Help you, ma'am?" I need a key," I said, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. "Well, we've got a few of those," he said with a gentle smile. "What's it for?" "A box, a small, metal strongbox. About this big." I held my hands apart, demonstrating. "The lock is quite small." He nodded. "Sounds like an old filing box. Probably takes a simple wafer lock." "You've lost the key?" "It was my mother's. I never had one." He studied me for a moment, his head tilted. "You could try a locksmith. They'd open it for you in a jiffy, or—" He reached under the counter and pulled out a flat, metal case. He opened it to reveal rows of slender, shiny tools. "You could try a lock-picking set. It's not as hard as it looks. Just takes a little patience and a gentle touch." A lock-picking set. The words sounded illicit, dangerous. This wasn't something Ruth Walker, of 2147 Crestview Drive, did. Ruth Walker waited for her husband to fix things. But the woman holding the strongbox, the woman with the tectonic anger, she was someone else entirely. "I'll take it," I heard myself say. Back in the sanctuary of my closet, I laid the tools out on the carpet like a surgeon's instruments. There were two main picks. One that was thin and curved at the end, and a thinner, L-shaped tool called a tension wrench. The instructions were a single, poorly photocopied sheet of paper. Insert tension wrench and apply slight rotational pressure. Use the pick to feel for the pins inside the lock. Lift each pin until you feel it set. It sounded impossible. My hands, more accustomed to arranging flowers and kneading dough, felt clumsy and large. I inserted the tension wrench into the bottom of the keyhole and applied a faint pressure, just as the instructions said. Then, I slid the pick in beside it. I closed my eyes, trying to feel. At first, it was just metal, scraping against metal. I jiggled the pick, feeling nothing but resistance. Frustration bubbled up inside me. This was stupid, a foolish fantasy. What did I think I was going to find? A treasure map? A ticket to a new life? I was a 53-year-old woman sitting on a closet floor, trying to pick a lock. The absurdity of it was almost crushing. I was about to give up when I felt it. A tiny, almost imperceptible click through the metal pick. One of the pins had set. A jolt of pure, undiluted excitement shot through me. It was the first real, tangible progress I had made in anything that was solely for me in longer than I could remember. It took me over an hour. My back ached, my neck was stiff, and my fingers were sore. But I was consumed by a focus so intense the rest of the world fell away. There was no mark, no beautiful prison of a house, no burden. There was only the lock, the feel of the pins, the subtle feedback through the metal. Click, click, click. Finally, with a soft, satisfying thunk, the torsion wrench turned. The lock was open, my heart hammered against my ribs. I set the tools down and, with trembling hands, lifted the lid of the strongbox. There was no stack of cash, no glittering jewels. No shocking love letters. The contents were mundane. A small, velvet jewelry pouch. A stack of old, yellowed papers held together with a brittle rubber band. And a single, small, black and white photograph. I picked up the photograph first. It showed my mother, Eleanor, but a version of her I had never known. She couldn't have been more than 20. She was sitting on a low stone wall, her head thrown back in laughter. Her hair wild and long, not the neat, sensible bob she'd worn my whole life. She was wearing trousers and a man's oversized shirt rolled up at the sleeves. And she was looking not at the camera, but at the man sitting beside her. He was handsome, with a strong, open face and dark, intense eyes. He was looking at her with an expression of such naked adoration, it made my breath catch. It wasn't my father. My hands were shaking now. I set the photo aside and picked up the velvet pouch. It was heavy. I loosened the drawstring and tipped the contents into my palm. It was a necklace. A simple, elegant pendant on a fine gold chain. But the pendant, it was a raw, uncut piece of emerald about the size of my thumbnail. It wasn't polished or faceted, it was a piece of the earth, rugged and beautiful, captured in gold prongs. It was utterly unlike the delicate, predictable pearls Mark had given me over the years. This was wild, this was her. Finally, I turned to the papers. I slipped off the crumbling rubber band, and it disintegrated into dust. The top document was a birth certificate. My mother's. Underneath that were her college transcripts from Berkeley. I blinked. I never knew she went to Berkeley. She'd always been just Mom. I scanned the grades. She'd been a geology major. Geology? The woman who taught second grade and grew prize-winning roses had studied rocks? Beneath the transcripts was a folded, legal-sized document. I unfolded it carefully. The heading made my heart stop. Last Will and Testament of Eleanor Margaret Morrison. This was it. This was what she had locked away. But why? I knew she had a will. I'd been the executor. It had been straightforward. Her modest savings, the house, her personal effects, all to me. This was different. This was handwritten, not typed. It was dated. I squinted at the cursive script, nearly 35 years ago. A year before I was born. I began to read. I, Eleanor Margaret Morrison, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament, revoking all others. First, I leave my heartfelt apologies to my daughter, Ruth, for the truths I have kept from her. A mother's love is sometimes a fearful thing, and I chose the path of safety over the path of truth. I hope one day she can understand, and forgive me. Upon my death, all my worldly possessions, including my home and savings, are to be held in trust for my daughter, Ruth, until her 50th birthday. However, the bulk of my estate is not contained in these things. To my beloved daughter, Ruth, I bequeath the attached claim and all rights thereto. For the land and mineral rights of the parcel known as the Sage Creek Claim, located in the Sierra Nevada mountains, near the town of Independence, Inyo County, California. This claim was registered to me on the 12th of August 1972 and has been maintained in good standing ever since. Mineral rights? A land claim? My mother, the second-grade teacher, owned a piece of a mountain? The will continued, the handwriting becoming a bit more rushed. This land was my heart before you were, my darling girl. It was given to me by a man who loved me, a geologist named Arthur Lee. The emerald pendant is from that land. It is not a trinket, it is a promise. Arthur believed, and my own research confirmed, that the Sage Creek claim sits on a significant deposit of high-quality emeralds. We were on the verge of filing the paperwork for a full mining partnership when he passed away. A rock slide. I couldn't bear to continue without him. I left that life, and that part of myself, behind. I came home, met your father, and built a safe, quiet life. But the claim is yours now. It is your inheritance, not of money, but of possibility. It is a chance to finish what we started, or to sell it and build a new life for yourself. It is your freedom, Ruth. The freedom I was too afraid to seize. Do not be afraid like I was. With all my love, now and always. Mother, I sat there on the closet floor, the papers spread around me like fallen leaves, the raw emerald pendant cool and heavy in my hand. The world had just been ripped open. My mother, the woman I thought I knew, was a stranger. A geologist, a lover, a claim holder. A woman who had walked away from a potential fortune for a safe, conventional life, and had spent the rest of her days hiding a secret that could have changed everything, and she had left it to me. Not to the dutiful daughter, the good wife, but to me, Ruth. She had left me a key to a different life, a life of risk and potential and wild, untamed beauty, symbolized by that uncut emerald. A sob caught in my throat, but it wasn't a sob of sadness. It was one of overwhelming, terrifying, exhilarating revelation. The walls of my closet, of my house, of my entire existence, seemed to shrink and then expand infinitely. I wasn't just Ruth Walker, the burden. I was Ruth Morrison, heir to a mountain. I was the daughter of a woman who had loved a geologist and studied the bones of the earth. I heard the garage door open. Mark was home. The sound was like a bucket of cold water. Instantly, I was scrambling, my heart pounding with a new kind of fear. I shoved the will, the transcripts, the photograph, and the pendant back into the strongbox. I snapped the lock shut, hid the box and the lock-picking set behind the sweaters, and stood up, smoothing my hair and my clothes just as the front door opened. "Ruth, I'm home." His voice echoed through the house, the master, the provider, the man who saw me as a well-kept pet. I walked out of the closet and into the bedroom, my face a carefully constructed mask of calm. But inside I was a roaring, churning tempest. I had a secret now, a real one. Not just a feeling of discontent, but a physical, legal, tangible secret. As I went downstairs to greet my husband, to ask him about his day, to play my part, the weight of the emerald pendant felt like it was burning a hole through the floorboards above me. My mother's final words echoed in my mind, a mantra, a battle cry. "It is your freedom, Ruth. Do not be afraid like I was." And for the first time, looking at Mark as he loosened his tie and complained about the traffic, I knew, with a certainty that settled deep into my bones, that I would not be. Freedom, I was learning, wasn't a single, grand gesture. It wasn't a dramatic confrontation or slamming a door. It was a whisper, a secret, a small, defiant act performed in a locked room. The knowledge of my mother's inheritance was a live wire inside me, crackling with a voltage that lit up the darkest, most complacent corners of my soul. But it was also a dangerous secret. To reveal it to Mark now would be to hand him the keys to my cage and ask him to please lock it again, only more securely this time. He would have swooped in with lawyers and accountants, managing it, handling it until it was just another asset in his portfolio, and I was once again the bystander in my own life. No, this was mine. And before I could even think about what to do with a mountain, I had to learn how to stand on my own 2 feet on level ground. The first whisper of my independence was a bank account. It sounds so simple, so trivial, but for me, it felt as perilous and illicit as smuggling state secrets. I had never had my own bank account. When we were first married, it was just easier to have a joint account. Mark managed the investments, the big picture. I managed the household expenses from the same pool of money. My name was on the account. But the financial sovereignty, the sense that I had money that was mine, earned or otherwise, was a foreign concept. The following Tuesday, under the guise of running errands, I drove to a credit union on the other side of the city, one with a generic, forgettable name. My palms were slick with sweat on the steering wheel. I felt like everyone could see my intention, my rebellion, written across my forehead. The bank was quiet, almost hushed. A young woman with a friendly smile named Chloe, not David's Chloe, a different one, greeted me from behind a desk. "How can I help you today?" she asked. "I'd like to open a savings account," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I cleared my throat. "A private savings account." "Of course," she said, her fingers clicking efficiently on her keyboard. "Just yourself?" "Yes, just me." She walked me through the paperwork. Name, address, social security number. I wrote it all down, with a hand that trembled only slightly. When it came to the line for initial deposit, I took a deep breath, opened my purse, and counted out 5 $100 bills. It was money I had been slowly, secretly siphoning away, for months. A 20 here from the grocery budget when I used a coupon. A 50 there from the cash Mark would give me for the gardener, when I decided to pull the weeds myself instead. It was money he would never miss, money that was technically ours, but it felt like contraband. Laying it on the counter felt like a declaration of war. Chloe took the bills, counted them with a practiced flick of her wrist, and handed me a temporary debit card and a deposit slip. "There you go, Miss Walker. Your account is all set up. You'll receive your permanent card in the mail in 7 to 10 business days. Miss Walker." Not Mrs. The title felt sharp, unfamiliar, and powerful. I was no longer an appendage. In this small, fluorescent-lit room, I was an individual, a financial entity. I walked out of that bank into the bland afternoon sun, the little piece of plastic burning a hole in my wallet. It was the most empowering $500 I had ever possessed. It was a seed, a tiny, fragile seed of a future I couldn't yet see. That seed needed soil. It needed a reason to grow. The emerald claim was a distant, almost mythical prospect. It felt like a lottery ticket, potentially life-changing, but abstract. I needed something tangible, something I could build with my own hands, right now. I needed to prove to myself that I could. The idea came to me a few days later, while I was on the phone with Grace. She was telling me about her struggles with her new smartphone, about how the world was moving too fast, and how she missed the simplicity of her old recipe box, filled with cards, written in her mother's looping cursive. "And I can never find a good, simple recipe online, Ruthie. It's all life-changing this and one pot that, and they always have an ingredient I don't have. I just want Mrs. Henderson's lemon pound cake, the way she wrote it down. You know." I did know. I had my own collection, a battered wooden box filled with my mother's recipes. Grace's, Clara's, and ones I'd collected over the years. They were stained with vanilla and splatters of gravy, the margins filled with notes like "David loves this," or "Halve the salt for Mark." An idea, quiet and perfect, bloomed in my mind. "Grace," I said, interrupting her gently, What if I typed them up? All the family recipes. I could make them look nice, print them out, and bind them into a little book for you." "Oh, Ruthie, that would be a treasure. But it's so much work for you." "It wouldn't be work," I said, and I meant it. "It would be a joy." And then, the whisper came again, a little louder this time. "In fact, what if I did it for other people? What if there are other people like you, who want their family recipes preserved, but don't have the time or the know-how to do it beautifully?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. "You mean, like a business?" The word sent a thrill through me, followed immediately by a cold wash of fear. A business. Ruth Walker didn't have a business. Ruth Walker had hobbies. "Just a little one," I said quickly. "Something to keep me busy." "Well, I think it's a wonderful idea," Grace said, her warmth flooding the line. "You have such a lovely eye for design, and your typing is so much better than mine." That afternoon, I went into Mark's home office. He was at work. The room smelled of his cologne and lemon polish. It was a space of masculine authority, dark wood, leather, a large monitor. His computer was password protected, a fortress I had no desire to breach. But in the corner, covered in a fine layer of dust, was an old laptop I'd used years ago for volunteering. He'd long since deemed it obsolete. I took it to the kitchen table, plugged it in, and held my breath. It whirred to life, slow and groaning, but it worked. It was mine, it was a tool. I spent the rest of the day in a state of focused bliss I hadn't experienced in years. I created a simple, elegant design template. I typed out Grace's recipe for lemon pound cake, carefully noting, "Sift the flour twice, and the zest is key." I found a free stock photo of a rustic kitchen and placed it beside the text. It looked professional, beautiful, real. I named it right there at the top of the page, "Heirloom Recipes, Preserved with Care." I didn't put my name on it. It was my own secret identity. I used my new, secret bank account to pay for a monthly subscription to a basic design website. I created a new, separate email address, heirloom.recipes@gmail.com. Each step was a tiny act of creation, a brick being laid in the foundation of my own identity. A few days later, I took another risk. I mentioned my new hobby to Clara. I framed it as a little project for Grace, but I showed her the printed page for the lemon pound cake. She held it, her reading glasses perched on her nose, her expression unreadable. She was silent for a long time. "Well?" I finally asked, my nerves getting the better of me. "What do you think?" She looked up at me, and to my astonishment, I saw not criticism, but a glint of fierce approval in her eyes. "It's good," she said, her voice crisp. "The layout is clean. The instructions are clear. It has a quiet confidence." She set the paper down. "This is how you do it, Ruth. You start small. You build a skill. You create something that is yours, that no one can take from you. This," she tapped the paper, "is more valuable than you know. It's not about the recipes. It's about the process. It's about remembering who you are." Her words were a balm and a catalyst. I started spending my afternoons, when Mark was at work, fully immersed in this new world. I told him I was organizing family history, which was technically true. He'd just grunt, pleased I'd found a harmless, domestic pursuit to occupy my time. I gathered my courage and, using a fake name, posted on a local community forum for a beta tester. I offered to create a beautiful 5-recipe family cookbook for one person for free in exchange for their feedback. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Dozens of people emailed my secret Gmail account. They sent me photos of their grandmother's handwritten recipes for Irish soda bread, their father's famous chili, a beloved aunt's baklava. They shared stories with these recipes, little snippets of their lives and their love. I chose a woman named Maria, whose grandmother had just passed away. She sent me a photo of a recipe for tamales, written in delicate Spanish on a piece of paper so stained and worn it was soft as cloth. She told me about her abuela, how she'd taught her to spread the masa just so. I worked on Maria's recipes for a week. I treated her abuela's instructions with the reverence they deserved. When I was done, I had created a beautiful 12-page digital booklet. I sent it to her, my heart in my throat. Her reply came an hour later. It was a single paragraph, but it made me cry. "Thank you," she wrote. "You have given me back a piece of her. This is more than a recipe book. It is a piece of our family's soul, made beautiful. I can't thank you enough." She insisted on paying me $50. She sent it through an online payment system directly to my new bank account. When the notification popped up on my phone, "Payment received $50, I stared at it transfixed. It wasn't the money, though the sight of that number, earned by my own skill and labor, was profoundly moving. It was the validation. Maria didn't know I was the wife of a wealthy man. She didn't know I lived in a big house on Crestview Drive. She knew me as the person who had carefully, lovingly preserved her memory, and she found that valuable. I was sitting at the kitchen table, looking at that notification, a slow, real smile spreading across my face, when Mark came home early. He walked in, loosening his tie, and stopped when he saw me. "You look pleased with yourself. What have you been up to?" The smile vanished from my face, replaced by the familiar, placid mask. But for the first time, it felt like a mask. The real me was right there, underneath, holding a secret bank card and the memory of a $50 payment for a job well done. "Just puttering," I said, closing the old laptop. "How was your day?" He launched into a story about a rival firm, his voice filling the space, demanding center stage. I nodded in the right places, but my mind was elsewhere. It was with Maria and her abuela's tamales. It was with the emerald pendant hidden in my closet. It was with the whisper of independence that was growing, day by day, into a voice I was starting to recognize as my own. It was quiet, yes, but it was steady. And it was no longer asking for permission to speak. The human spirit is a curious thing. Give it just a taste of sunlight, and it will stubbornly push its way through the darkest, most compacted soil. For 2 months, my secret life was that fragile sprout. My heirloom recipes project was no longer just a beta test. I had 5 paying clients. 5. I'd created a simple price list: $25 for a single, beautifully formatted recipe card, $100 for a digital booklet of 5. The money was trickling into my secret account, a slow, steady drip that felt more satisfying than any of the large sums that passed through our joint account for household expenses. This money was mine, earned by my mind, my taste, my ability to listen to a stranger's story and translate their love into something tangible. It was an antidote to the word burden that still echoed in my quiet moments. I was careful, meticulous. I only worked on the old laptop. I kept all my files on a small, encrypted flash drive that lived in the same hiding place as my mother's strongbox. I cleared the browser history every time. I was a ghost in the machine of my own home. But pride, it seems, is the downfall of many a careful plan. It wasn't a major slip-up, it was a tiny, almost imperceptible crack. I had finished a project for a client, a beautiful compilation of Ukrainian Easter recipes, and I was so proud of how it had turned out. The client had been thrilled. On a whim, I printed one of the pages, the one for Pascha bread, with its intricate, braided design. I just wanted to hold it, to see my work exist in the physical world. I meant to shred it immediately after. But the phone rang. It was Grace, upset because a stray cat she'd been feeding had disappeared. I spent half an hour comforting her, and in my distraction, I forgot the printed page. I left it in the tray of the wireless printer in Mark's office. A week passed. The page sat there, buried under a few sheets of his own printing. I didn't even remember it was there. The storm broke on a rainy Thursday. Mark had been working from home, shut in his office all day. I was in the kitchen, testing a recipe for a client for maple rosemary shortbread cookies. The house was filled with the warm, sweet, and savory scent. It was a scent of my secret industry, and I was happy, humming softly to myself. He came out of his office around 4 o'clock. His face was like granite. In his hand, he held the printed page of the Pascha bread recipe. My heart stopped. The humming died in my throat. "What," he said, his voice dangerously quiet, "is this?" The world seemed to slow down. I could see every detail of the room with hyperclarity. The rain streaking the window panes, a single crumb on the countertop, the faint tremor in my own hand as I set down the wooden spoon. It's a recipe," I said, my voice thin. "I can see that." He didn't move from the doorway, holding the paper as if it were something contaminated. "It's not one of yours. Heirloom recipes, preserved with care." He read the header at the top of the page with a mocking, flat tone. Care to explain? The strategist Clara had urged me to be had gone into hiding. I was just Ruth, caught. "It's a little project I've been working on. For some people online. I design recipe cards for them." "A project," he repeated. He took a step into the kitchen. "You're running a business, out of my home. Using my electricity, my internet, my printer." My. The word was a whip. "It's just a hobby, Mark. It doesn't cost anything. I use the old laptop." "A hobby?" He gave a short, ugly laugh. "This has a business name on it, Ruth. This isn't a hobby. This is you pretending to be something you're not." He threw the paper onto the kitchen island. It skidded and landed next to my bowl of cookie dough. "Who are these people online? Have you lost your mind? They could be anyone. Scammers, criminals. They're just people who want their family recipes preserved," I said, a spark of defiance igniting in my chest. "It makes them happy. It makes me happy." "Happy?" He slammed his hand flat on the counter, making the bowl jump. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet kitchen. "You have a life here that most women would kill for. A beautiful home, financial security, a husband who provides. And you're wasting your time, my time, playing graphic designer for strangers for what, pin money?" He saw the flicker in my eyes, the slight tightening of my mouth. He was preternaturally perceptive when it came to any challenge to his authority. You're charging for this, he stated, his eyes narrowing to slits. It wasn't a question. I said nothing. My silence was confirmation. How much? How much have you taken? It's my money, I whispered, the words feeling brave and foolish all at once. That was the wrong thing to say. His face darkened, a storm cloud ready to break. He moved around the island, coming to stand over me. He wasn't a tall man, but in that moment he seemed to loom, filling the entire space. Your money? He hissed, his voice low and venomous. There is no your money, Ruth. There is our money. The money I earn. The money that pays for this roof, this food, the clothes on your back. Everything you have is because of me. Everything you are is because of me. The tectonic anger I had been nursing for months finally erupted. It didn't come out as a shout, but as a cold, clear statement. I am the one who built this home. I am the one who raised our son. I am the one who has stood by your side for 28 years. That has to be worth something. He looked at me with such pure, undiluted contempt that I took a step back. Worth something, he sneered. It was your job. It's what you were supposed to do. And you know what? You've gotten comfortable. You've gotten lazy. You live in a bubble of your own making, with your books and your flowers, completely disconnected from the real world where people work and struggle. You have no idea what it takes. You are a burden. A pleasant, well-dressed burden, but a burden nonetheless. And this, he gestured contemptuously at the printed recipe, this little fantasy of yours ends. Now. The word landed again. But this time it didn't hollow me out. It solidified me. It turned my fear into a cold, hard diamond of resolve. No, I said. The single syllable hung in the air between us, stark and unbelievable. He blinked, as if he hadn't heard me correctly. What did you say to me? I said no. My voice was trembling, but it didn't break. It's not a fantasy. It's my work. And I'm not stopping. His control snapped. The carefully constructed facade of the sophisticated, successful man evaporated, leaving behind something raw and ugly. You ungrateful bitch, he snarled, his face inches from mine. The smell of his aftershave, usually a scent I associated with home, now made me nauseous. After everything I've given you, this is the thanks I get. You will shut this down. You will close whatever back-alley bank account you've opened and you will hand me the money. You will never speak of this again. Is that clear? I stood my ground, my heart hammering so hard I thought it would burst from my chest. It's my decision. It is not your decision, he roared. You are my wife. You will do as I say. This is my house, and I will not have you embarrassing me with some pathetic, little Etsy side hustle. You are a 53-year-old woman, Ruth. Act your age. Who do you think you are? The question hung in the air, and for the first time, I had an answer. A real answer. I'm not sure yet, I said, my voice eerily calm. But I'm going to find out. The shock on his face was almost comical. He had expected tears, submission, capitulation. He had not expected this quiet, unshakable defiance. He was losing, and he knew it. The only tool he had left was brute force. Get out, he whispered, his voice shaking with rage. I stared at him. What? You heard me. Get out of my house. If you want to be so independent, then go. Go be independent. See how far you get without me. See how your clients like you when you're living in a cardboard box. He was throwing me out. In the pouring rain. Over a recipe for Pasca bread, I looked at him, at the man I had shared a bed with for 28 years, and I saw a stranger. A cruel, small, terrified stranger. And in that moment, the last fragile thread that bound me to him snapped. I didn't plead, I didn't cry. I simply turned, walked to the closet, and took my coat and my purse. I didn't look at him as I walked to the front door. My hands were steady as I turned the knob. I paused on the threshold, the cold, damp air washing over me. I looked back at him, standing in the warmth and light of the home I had made. "You're right about one thing, Mark," I said, my voice clear and carrying in the quiet house. "I have been a burden. But not to you, to myself." And then I stepped out into the rain, closing the door softly behind me. I didn't slam it. The quiet click of the latch was far more final. I stood on the porch, the rain soaking my hair and my coat, and I felt a terrifying, exhilarating, and profound thing. I was free. And I had absolutely nowhere to go. The rain was a cold, relentless baptism. It soaked through my coat, plastered my hair to my scalp, and dripped down my neck. I stood on the porch of what was no longer my home, the keys to my car, a car registered in his name, digging into my palm. The engine turned over with a purr, a sound of insulated luxury that felt obscenely out of place with the raw, exposed state of my life. I had no plan. The cold, hard diamond of resolve I'd felt in the kitchen was still there, but it was now surrounded by the sheer, paralyzing terror of the unknown. Where does a 53-year-old woman with a secret bank account of $800 and a flash drive full of recipes go at 4:30 on a rainy Thursday afternoon? My hands, acting on an instinct my mind hadn't yet caught up with, drove me to the only place that felt like a possible sanctuary, Clara's apartment. Clara lived in a sturdy, no-nonsense brick building that had survived decades of urban change. It wasn't a fancy part of town, but it was a real one. There were small, independent shops at street level and people walking dogs under umbrellas. It felt alive. I parked the car, the weight of what had just happened finally crashing down on me. I was shaking, a fine, uncontrollable tremor that came from deep within my core. The adrenaline was receding, leaving a vast, cold emptiness in its wake. I buzzed her apartment. No voice came through the intercom, just the harsh electronic buzz of the lock disengaging. I pushed the heavy door open and climbed the 2 flights of stairs to her door. It was already ajar. She stood there, silhouetted against the warm light of her living room. She took one look at me drenched, shaking, my face a mask of rain and suppressed shock, and simply stood aside. "Get in," she said, her voice devoid of surprise. "You're tracking water on my hall runner." I stumbled inside. The apartment was exactly as I remembered it, shelves overflowing with books, a few pieces of good, solid furniture, the scent of lemon polish and old paper. It was a space of intellect and uncompromising self-possession. She closed the door and guided me to her small, tidy kitchen, sitting me down at the table. She filled a kettle and put it on the stove. The familiar, domestic sounds were an anchor in my whirling chaos. She didn't ask what happened. She simply placed a mug of strong, steaming tea in front of me and waited, her arms crossed, leaning against the counter. The heat from the mug seeped into my icy fingers. I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. A sob, harsh and ragged, tore from my throat instead. And then the floodgates opened. I cried for the life I had lost, for the humiliation, for the terrifying void of the future. I cried for the girl who had married Mark, for the woman who had believed his lies, and for the person I was now, cast out into the rain. Clara didn't pat my shoulder or offer soothing words. She let me cry. She just stood there, a silent, immovable pillar, until the storm of tears had passed and I was left with hiccuping, hollow breaths. When I could finally speak, the story tumbled out in broken fragments. The printed recipe, his rage, the word burden flung at me like a weapon, the ultimatum, my quiet no, and finally his command to get out. "He threw me out, Clara," I whispered, staring into the dark depths of my tea. In the rain, over a recipe card. Clara's lips tightened into a thin, white line. The only sign of her anger. "Good," she said. I looked up, startled. "Good? Good that you said no. Good that you walked out. The alternative was to kneel. And you, my dear, are not built for kneeling, not anymore." She pushed away from the counter and sat opposite me. Now, the theatrics are over. The real work begins. You cannot go back. I know, I said, the words a painful admission. No, I mean you legally cannot go back. Not yet. If you return now, you set a precedent. You forgive the unforgivable. You tell him, and any judge who might later hear about this, that his behavior was acceptable. That a man can throw his wife out of her home and face no consequences. Her eyes were sharp, focused. This is no longer about your feelings, Ruth. This is about strategy. This is war, and you are woefully unarmed. The word war made my stomach clench. I just wanted to make recipe books, I said, a fresh wave of despair washing over me. And now you want to survive, she countered bluntly. And to thrive. To do that, you need to understand the battlefield. What are your assets? I listed them, my voice small. The clothes on my back, my purse, my car, but it's in his name. About $800 in a secret bank account. My mother's strong box and the flash drive with my business files are still in the house. Clara nodded, taking mental inventory. The car is a problem. He could report it stolen. We'll have to deal with that. The money is a start, but it's not enough for a retainer. We need a lawyer, Ruth. A good one. A shark. A lawyer. The idea was so formal, so final. It meant taking the private, painful rupture of our marriage and laying it bare for a stranger to pick over. It meant admitting, publicly, that I had failed. Clara, I can't afford a shark. Let me worry about that, she said, a glint in her eye. I have some money put away. And I know people. She stood up and went to an old-fashioned Rolodex on her desk, flipping through the cards with practiced efficiency. Eleanor Shapiro, divorce attorney, the best. She ate my friend Margaret's husband for breakfast and spit out the bones. He was a partner at a big law firm, thought he was untouchable. Eleanor dismantled him. She scribbled a number on a piece of paper and handed it to me. Call her. First thing in the morning. Tell her I sent you. Now, she said, her tone becoming brisk, you'll stay here tonight. The sofa pulls out. It's uncomfortable, but it will build character. Tomorrow, we go to the bank. You need to withdraw that $800 before he finds a way to freeze your accounts. He wouldn't. Ruth, she said, her voice dropping, laced with a lifetime of witnessing the worst of human nature. He threw you out in the rain. He absolutely would. He will use every tool at his disposal to break you, to force you to come crawling back. Your only defense is to be smarter, faster, and colder than he is. The next 24 hours were a blur of terrifying, purposeful activity. I called Eleanor Shapiro from Clara's landline the next morning. Her voice was calm, measured, and devoid of pity. She listened as I recounted the events, interrupting only to ask precise, clarifying questions. Emotional and financial abuse, culminating in constructive desertion when he ordered you to leave the marital home. She summarized, her tone clinical. We can work with that. The business, however small, establishes you as an income earner, which is good. The secret account shows financial planning under duress. Can you come to my office at 2 o'clock? We have a lot to discuss. Clara drove me. I was too much of a wreck to get behind the wheel. Eleanor Shapiro's office was in a modern high-rise, all glass and steel. She was a compact woman in her 60s, with intelligent eyes and a handshake that could crack walnuts. For 2 hours, she asked me questions that made my head spin. She asked about our assets. The house, the cars, the investment portfolios, the retirement accounts. I knew about the house and the cars. The rest was a vast, murky territory Mark had always told me was too complicated for me to worry about. She asked about debt. I didn't know. She asked if I had ever signed a prenuptial agreement. I hadn't. When I expressed my shame at my ignorance, she waved a dismissive hand. Don't. It's the oldest trick in the book. Keep the wife in the dark. Tell her you're handling it. then act shocked when she expects a fair share of what she helped build. It's not ignorance, Mrs. Walker, it's disempowerment. And we're going to re-empower you. She outlined a plan. I would file for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences and Mark's abusive behavior. I would immediately file a motion for temporary spousal support and for exclusive use of the marital home. The home? I said, aghast. I can't go back there. Whether you choose to live there is your decision, she said firmly. But establishing your legal right to do so is crucial. It establishes the home as a marital asset, not his personal property. It also forces him out if he becomes disruptive. We will also subpoena all financial records going back 7 years. We need to see the full picture. It was overwhelming. It was also the most empowering conversation of my life. This woman wasn't asking me to be a good wife. She was teaching me how to be my own advocate. As we were leaving, she said one last thing. Mrs. Walker, from this moment on, document everything. Every text, every email, every voicemail from your husband. If he shows up somewhere you are, write it down. Date, time, what was said. He will try to contact you. He will likely oscillate between rage and pleading. Do not respond. Direct all communication to me. You are a black hole. You give him nothing. Understood? I nodded, the weight of the instructions settling on my shoulders. Clara was quiet on the drive back to her apartment. Finally, she spoke. Well, do you feel like you've hired a piranha? I feel, I said slowly, like I've just been given a map and a weapon after wandering in the dark for 28 years. Back at Clara's, I did 2 more things that felt monumentally significant. First, using her computer, I formally registered Heirloom Recipes as a sole proprietorship with the state. It cost $75. It was no longer a secret hobby. It was a legal entity. My entity. Second, I called Grace. I knew Clara had likely already briefed her, but I needed to hear her voice. Oh, my darling girl, Grace whispered, and I could hear the tears in her own. My brave, brave Ruthie, you should have called me last night. You could have come here. I know, Grace. I'm sorry, I was just numb. Clara told me what that monster did. I always knew he had a cold heart, but this is evil. She took a shuddering breath. You listen to me, Ruth Ellen Morrison. You are not a burden, you are a light, you always have been. And we are going to get through this. You are not alone. After I hung up, I stood by Clara's window, looking down at the street below. People were living their lives, unaware that my entire world had been dismantled and was now being reassembled into a strange, frightening new shape. I thought of my mother's will. It is your freedom, Ruth. Do not be afraid. I was terrified, but for the first time the fear was not paralyzing. It was a fuel. I had crossed a point of no return. There was no going back to the pretty cage. There was only forward, into the terrifying, wide-open space of my own life. I had a lawyer who was a piranha, 2 aunts who were my army, and a secret that could change everything. The path ahead was shrouded in fog, but I had taken the first, most important step. I had chosen myself. The silence after the explosion is often more terrifying than the blast itself. For the first 48 hours after I left, my world was suspended in a breathless, unnatural quiet. I expected the phone to ring, for Mark's number to flash on the screen with either fury or feigned concern. I expected a pounding on Clara's door, but there was nothing. It was a tactical silence, and somehow, that was worse than the shouting. It left room for my own doubts to scream in the void. Eleanor Shapiro called it the calm before the storm. She had filed the divorce petition and the motions for temporary support and exclusive use of the home. We've just lobbed a grenade over the wall, she'd said, her voice crisp on the speakerphone in Clara's living room. Now, we wait for the shrapnel. Clara had converted her small, book-lined den into my war room. The pull-out sofa was my bed, and her sturdy oak desk became my command center. On it sat the old laptop, now wiped clean of any connection to Mark's network, my flash drive, and a brand new, cheap, pay-as-you-go phone, my official line of communication with Eleanor and my lifeline to Grace. My old phone, the one tied to our family plan, was powered off in my purse, a dormant hive I was afraid to disturb. My first official act in the silent war was to write an email to my 5 heirloom recipes clients. Using the new phone as a hotspot, I logged into my secret Gmail account, my heart thumping. Dear valued clients, please be advised that Heirloom Recipes is in the process of a temporary relocation. All current projects will be completed on schedule. For any urgent communications, please use this email address. Thank you for your understanding and continued patronage. Sincerely, Ruth. I didn't sign it with my last name. I was just Ruth. It felt both vulnerable and powerful. The responses were immediate and kind. They wished me well, hoped the move went smoothly. Their normalcy was a balm. In their eyes, I wasn't a woman whose life was falling apart. I was a small business owner managing a relocation. I clung to that identity. The shrapnel arrived on the 3rd day, not from Mark, but from my son. My new phone buzzed, an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. Mom? David's voice was strained, confused. What's going on? I just got a call from Dad. He's losing it. He said you left? That you had some kind of breakdown and walked out? He said you're being influenced by Auntie Clara and that you've started some crazy business scheme? My heart shattered into 1,000 new pieces. Of course, Mark would spin it this way. The hysterical wife, the manipulative aunts, the midlife crisis. He was painting me as unstable to anyone who would listen, starting with our son. I took a deep breath, channeling Eleanor Shapiro's coolness. David, listen to me. I am perfectly fine. I did not have a breakdown. Your father and I are getting a divorce. A long silence. What? Why? What happened? How did he phrase it, David? That I just left? Did he tell you he threw me out of the house, in the pouring rain? Did he tell you he called me a burden? Another silence, thicker this time. He said, there was an argument. That you were acting erratically. He said you'd been secretive, and that when he confronted you, you blew up and walked out. The argument was about my recipe business, I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. He called it a pathetic fantasy. He demanded I shut it down and give him the money I'd earned. When I refused, he told me to get out. Those were his exact words. Get out of my house. I can't believe that, David whispered, but the certainty in his voice was cracking. He wouldn't. He did, David. He has been systematically belittling me for years. You've seen it. The comments at dinner. The way he talks about my simple life. This was just the final, ugly expression of what he's really thought of me all along. I paused, letting it sink in. I am staying with Clara. I am safe. And I am not coming back. He was quiet for a long time. I could hear his breathing, the weight of his shattered image of his parents settling on him. Okay, he said finally, his voice small. Okay, Mom. I believe you. It was a small victory, but it felt like winning a major battle. I had kept my son. The next volley came via my old phone. Clara and I had decided to power it on, just for a moment, to see what was there. The screen lit up like a Christmas tree. Dozens of missed calls from Mark. Voicemails. Text messages. The texts were a masterclass in the cycle of abuse. They began with rage. You have no right to do this. You will regret this, Ruth. How dare you involve lawyers? This is a personal matter between us. Tell that harpy Clara to stay out of our business. Then, they shifted to wounded pride. I cannot believe you would throw away 28 years over a misunderstanding. You've clearly been planning this. The secret bank account proves it. You're a schemer. And finally, the pleading. Ruth, please, come home, we can work this out. I'm sorry I lost my temper, you know how I get when I'm stressed. The house is so empty without you, I miss you. Don't do this to us. Don't do this to David. I felt each message like a physical blow, a hook trying to snag my heart and pull me back into the familiar chaos. The apology was the most dangerous. It was what I had waited 28 years to hear. But now, filtered through Eleanor's and Clara's warnings, I heard it for what it was, not remorse, but manipulation. A tactic. Don't you dare answer, Clara said, her voice a low growl from the doorway. She was holding a cup of tea for me. He's love-bombing you. It's what they do when they feel control slipping. I know. I whispered, my finger hovering over the delete button. It was so hard. The part of me that was still the young bride, the part that had loved him, was screaming to believe him. But the new me, the strategist, hit delete. Then I powered the phone off again. Good, Clara said. Now, we fight fire with fire. We need ammunition. She set the tea down and placed a brand new, leather-bound notebook and an expensive pen on the desk beside me. This is your log, start from the beginning. Everything you can remember. Every time he belittled you in public. Every time he controlled the finances. Every time he made you feel small. Dates, times, witnesses. We need a pattern. And so began the grim, cathartic work of excavation. I spent days filling the notebook. I wrote about the time he'd laughed at me for wanting to go back to school when David started kindergarten. I wrote about him taking the credit when I organized a fundraiser that saved his firm's community outreach program. I wrote about the countless times he called my interests quaint or cute. I wrote about the dinner with David and Chloe. The memory of each event, once a dull ache, now sharpened into a clear, prosecutable point of evidence. I was building my case, not just for the lawyers, but for myself. I was proving to myself that I hadn't imagined it. The prison had been real. My most daring mission, the one that felt like a scene from a spy novel, was Operation Strongbox. My mother's box and my business flash drive were still in my closet. I needed them back. I couldn't risk him finding them. With Eleanor's guidance, we orchestrated a plan. I would go to the house with a police escort for a civil standby to retrieve my essential personal belongings. It was a humiliating prospect, but a necessary one. On a bright, sunny Tuesday morning, I pulled up to my old house, a squad car right behind me. My heart was a frantic bird in my chest. The lawn was perfectly manicured. The hydrangeas were still that stunning, impossible blue. It looked like a postcard of a life I no longer lived. A young, uniformed officer, Officer Miller, got out. "Ready, ma'am?" I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. Mark opened the door before we could ring the bell. He was dressed for work, his face a mask of cold, controlled fury. He looked past me, at the police car, and his eyes narrowed. "What is the meaning of this, Ruth?" he hissed. "Mrs. Walker is here to retrieve some of her personal effects," Officer Miller said, his voice neutral and professional. "I have a bag for her right here," Mark said, gesturing to a small duffel bag by the door. It was a calculated insult, implying my entire life could be condensed into one bag. "I have a right to retrieve my belongings, Mark," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "I'll just be a moment." I walked past him, into the foyer. The house smelled the same lemon polish and his cologne. It felt alien and hostile. I went straight upstairs to the walk-in closet. My clothes hung neatly, a ghost wardrobe. I ignored them. I went directly to the stack of sweaters and felt behind them. My fingers closed around the cold metal of the strongbox and the plastic of the flash drive. A wave of relief so profound it made me dizzy washed over me. I slipped them into my large purse. I took a few other things, my grandmother's quilt from the linen closet, a few photo albums, the small jewelry box that held pieces from my mother. Nothing of significant monetary value, but everything of sentimental value. I left the silk nightgowns, the designer dresses. They weren't me anymore. As I came back downstairs, Mark was standing by the door, his arms crossed. Satisfied, he sneered. I looked at him, at the man who had shared my bed and my life, and I felt nothing but a vast, cold distance. Not yet, I said quietly, and walked out the door, Officer Miller following behind me. In the car, clutching my purse with its precious cargo, I didn't look back. The silent war was raging, but I had just won a crucial skirmish. I had my past and my future back in my hands, and I was ready for whatever he would throw at me next. The silence was over. The battle was joined. Wars are not won by grand, sweeping offensives alone. They are won in the trenches, in the daily grind of holding the line, in the quiet, soul-wearying work of not breaking. The weeks that followed my retrieval mission were a trench war. I lived in the limbo of Clara's pull-out sofa, my life condensed to a duffel bag and a cardboard box. My world was the four walls of her den, the glow of my laptop screen, and the relentless, grinding anxiety of the legal process. Mark's lawyer, a man named Stephen Thorne, whose voice on the phone was as smooth and slick as an oil spill, had responded to our filings with a counter-petition. It was a masterpiece of character assassination. He painted me as an unstable, spendthrift wife who had abandoned a stable marriage for a frivolous hobby influenced by meddling relatives. He contested the temporary spousal support, claiming I was capable of supporting myself, and that my voluntary departure negated any claim to the marital home. He requested that I be ordered to undergo a psychological evaluation. Reading those words, drafted by a stranger but fueled by Mark's venom, was like being flayed alive. The cold, legal language gave his cruelty a terrifying legitimacy. "Standard operating procedure," Eleanor Shapiro said, her voice crackling with contempt through the speakerphone. "They try to rattle you, to make you feel crazy for wanting basic human dignity. Don't take the bait. We're preparing our response, and it will include a detailed log of his financial control and verbal abuse. Your notebook, Ruth, is becoming a powerful weapon." So, I kept writing. I documented the panic attacks I'd started having in the middle of the night, the way my stomach clenched every time the phone rang. I was documenting my own breakdown, but I framed it as the direct result of his abuse. I was turning my pain into evidence. My heirloom recipes business was my only respite, my tiny, sovereign nation in the midst of the chaos. The work was my therapy. Focusing on the precise temperature for a sugar syrup or the perfect kerning for a font forced my mind into a state of flow where the fear couldn't reach me. The trickle of money into my account, $100 here, $200 there, was a psychological lifeline. It was proof that I wasn't helpless. But the stress was a physical weight. I wasn't sleeping. I was living on tea and Clara's stubborn insistence that I eat the soups and stews she prepared. I felt 100 years old. The mirror in Clara's small bathroom showed me a pale, thin woman with shadows under her eyes. The well-kept, pleasant burden was fading, replaced by someone harder, sharper, and infinitely more tired. The catalyst came on a day that had been, until then, unremarkable. It was a Tuesday. I had a deadline for a client, a collection of traditional Polish recipes for a woman named Anya. I'd been working for hours, my back aching from the poor ergonomics of Clara's desk chair. A dull, throbbing pain had taken root behind my eyes, a constant companion these days. I stood up too quickly to go to the kitchen for more tea, and the world did a slow, nauseating tilt. Black spots danced at the edges of my vision. I stumbled, my hands shooting out to brace myself against the doorframe. "Ruth?" Clara's voice was sharp with alarm from the living room. I'm fine," I mumbled, but my voice sounded thin and far away. "Just stood up too fast." I took a few shaky steps into the hall. The pain behind my eyes intensified, sharpening into a stabbing sensation. A wave of nausea rolled through me so violently I had to clutch my stomach. "Clara," I gasped, And that was all I managed before my legs gave way. I didn't lose consciousness, not completely. There was a blur of sensation, the hard impact of the floor, Clara's frantic voice close to my ear, the cool press of her fingers on my wrist, checking my pulse. It was all happening through a thick, muffling pane of glass. Ambulance. Yes, now. I heard her bark into the phone. The next few hours were a disjointed montage of flashing lights, sterile smells, and clipped, professional voices. In the emergency room, tucked into a crisp hospital bed, the world slowly swam back into focus. A young doctor with a tired smile was shining a light in my eyes. Severe migraine, likely brought on by extreme stress and dehydration, he was saying to Clara. Her blood pressure is also quite elevated. We're going to give her some fluids and medication for the pain. She needs rest, a lot of it. Extreme stress. The diagnosis was so bland, so clinical, for the cataclysm that was tearing my life apart. Clara sat by my bedside, her face grim. She didn't say, "I told you so." She didn't need to. Her silence was a louder indictment of Mark than any shout could be. Lying in that hospital bed, tethered to an IV drip, something in me broke. But it wasn't a breaking into pieces, it was a breaking open. The dam of my endurance, which had been cracking for months, finally gave way. The fear, the anxiety, the desperate need to be strong, it all washed out of me, leaving behind a vast, clear pool of certainty. I had been fighting a war on his terms, reacting to his moves, defending myself against his accusations. I was letting his toxicity poison me, quite literally, to the point of collapse. This was the ultimate consequence of living as a burden. The weight of it was now trying to kill my body, not just my spirit. I looked at Clara, my vision clear for the first time in weeks. "I can't do this anymore," I whispered, my voice raspy. Her eyes narrowed. "What are you saying?" "I'm not saying I'm giving up. I'm saying I'm changing the game." The plan, which had been a vague, distant possibility in the back of my mind, now snapped into sharp, immediate focus. "I'm leaving, Clara. I'm not waiting for a court to give me permission to have a life. I'm taking it." She studied my face for a long moment, then a slow, fierce smile touched her lips. "Where will you go?" "I have a claim," I said, the words feeling solid and real in my mouth. "In the Sierra Nevada. My mother left it to me." It's time I saw what I inherited. The practicality of it was daunting. I had no car. My secret bank account had grown, but it was still only a few $1,000s, enough for a few months of frugal living, not for developing a mine. But the emerald pendant wasn't just a piece of jewelry, it was a symbol. It was a deed to a piece of the emerald earth. It was a promise of a foundation that was mine, and mine alone. Eleanor Shapiro was, predictably, less than thrilled when I called her from the hospital payphone. I refused to let Clara use her cell, paranoid about records. "Ruth, this is highly unorthodox," she said, her voice tight. "Leaving the jurisdiction can be portrayed as you abandoning the proceedings." "I'm not abandoning them," I said, my newfound certainty giving my voice a strength it had lacked for weeks. "I am relocating for my health. My doctor can attest to that. The stress here is making me physically ill. I am moving to an asset that is part of the marital estate to assess its value. That is not abandonment, that is due diligence." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could almost hear her recalibrating, reassessing the meek housewife she had first met. "That's actually not a bad angle," she conceded, a note of grudging respect in her voice. "But you must stay reachable. And you must understand, this is a risk." "I understand," I said. "But staying here is a bigger one." The following days were a whirlwind of preparation conducted in a state of serene, focused mania. The migraine had burned away the fear, leaving only purpose. With Clara's help, I found a cheap, 10-year-old hatchback for sale by owner. I paid for it in cash from my secret account. I packed my meager belongings, my clothes, the photo albums, my grandmother's quilt, my laptop, and the strongbox. I went to the bank and withdrew most of my savings, leaving only enough to keep the account open. I felt like a pioneer woman heading west, my worldly possessions stacked in the back of a dusty car. The night before I left, Grace came over. She hugged me for a long time, her plump frame shaking with silent sobs. "You call me every single day, you hear me? I don't care about the cost. I need to know my girl is safe." "I will, Grace, I promise." She pressed a wad of cash into my hand. "For emergencies, don't you dare say no." I took it, too grateful to refuse. Clara's goodbye was characteristically brisk. She handed me a detailed map she had printed, with a route highlighted in yellow marker, and a list of cheap, clean motels along the way. The world is full of people who will see a woman alone and think her an easy target. Don't be one. Be smart, be aware. And if anyone gives you trouble, you have my permission to be as rude as you need to be. I hugged her, this formidable woman who had been my general and my sanctuary. "Thank you, Clara, for everything." She patted my back, a rare physical gesture. "Go, be your mother's daughter, and for God's sake, get some Sunday. You look like a mushroom." The next morning, as the sun was just beginning to tint the sky a soft peach color, I loaded the last of my things into the hatchback. I slid into the driver's seat, the unfamiliar contours of the cheap upholstery a stark contrast to the leather of my old car. I put the key in the ignition. I was leaving. Not in a dramatic, door-slamming rage, but in a quiet, deliberate act of self-preservation. I was driving away from the battlefield, not in defeat, but to claim my own territory. I was no longer just fighting against a life I didn't want. I was driving toward one I did. I pulled away from the curb and didn't look back in the rear-view mirror. The road ahead was long and unknown, but for the first time in 28 years, I was the one holding the map. The catalyst for my final break hadn't been another cruel word from Mark. It had been my own body's final, desperate scream for mercy, and this time I had listened. There is a unique quality to the silence of the open road. It's not the oppressive, waiting silence of Clara's apartment or the hostile quiet of my old house. This silence was vast, clean, and filled with the steady hum of the engine and the rhythmic whir of the tires on asphalt. It was a silence that allowed me to hear myself think for the first time in years. For the first 100 miles, I was all nerve endings and white knuckles, my eyes constantly flicking to the rearview mirror, half expecting to see Mark's BMW roaring up behind me. But as the city sprawl melted into rolling hills, and then into the stark, beautiful expanse of the desert, the knot of anxiety in my chest began, slowly, to loosen. I was just a woman in a car, a speck on a map. It was terrifying, it was glorious. I drove for 2 days, following Clara's highlighted map. I stayed in the cheap motels she'd recommended, places with thin walls and neon signs that buzzed all night. I ate at diners where the coffee was strong and the waitresses called me honey. I didn't have to be Ruth Walker, the betrayed wife, the burden. I was just a traveler. It was the most profound anonymity I had ever experienced. On the 3rd day, the landscape began to change. The flat, arid plains started to buckle and rise, giving way to the mighty, granite shoulders of the Sierra Nevada. The air grew cooler, smelling of pine and dry earth. My little car strained on the inclines, but it felt like a metaphor for my own struggle, slow, laborious, but steadily climbing. The town of Independence, California, was not so much a town as a wide spot in the road, a collection of low-slung buildings nestled in the Owens Valley, with the snow-capped peaks of the Sierra looming impossibly high to the west. It was breathtaking. It was also the end of the line for my vague plan. I had arrived. Now what? I found a small, rustic motel at the edge of town called the Bristleconen, named after the ancient, gnarled trees that clung to life in the high mountains. The woman at the front desk had a face like weathered leather and kind eyes. Her name was Betty. "Looking for a room, dear?" she asked, looking me up and down without judgment. Yes, please. For a week, to start. She slid a worn ledger toward me. Just you? Just me. I paid in cash from the dwindling stack in my purse. The room was simple. A bed, a chair, a small table, and a view of the mountains that made my heart ache with its raw beauty. This was it. My new home, for now. The first thing I did was call Grace, as promised. I'm here, I said, my voice echoing in the empty room. It's monumental. Tell me everything, she demanded. I described the mountains, the clear air, the tiny town. I didn't tell her about the crushing loneliness that was already seeping in around the edges of the awe. Next, I called Clara. The eagle has landed, I said, using the code phrase we'd decided on. Good, she replied. Any trouble? None. The car held up. Update me after you see the claim. And Ruth. Breathe. After I hung up, the silence of the room returned, heavier now. I unpacked my few things, setting my mother's strongbox on the table. It was time. The Inyo County Assessor's office was a small, clapboard building next to the courthouse. The clerk, a young man with an earnest face, looked up as I entered. Can I help you, ma'am? I hope so, I said, my voice sounding small. I'm trying to find information about a mining claim. The Sage Creek claim. He nodded, not seeming at all surprised. This was that kind of town. He led me to a large, dusty book of maps and land records. Together, we traced the spidery lines of topography until he pointed a blunt finger at a shaded area. There she is. Sage Creek. It's a patented claim, about 20 acres, pretty remote. Access is via a Forest Service road, but you'll need a high-clearance vehicle for the last few miles. 4-wheel drive recommended. He looked at me. You the owner? I am now. It was my mother's. He smiled. Well, welcome. The annual filing fee was paid back in January. You're all set. I stood there, looking down at the map. A 20-acre piece of the earth, with my real name Morrison on the deed. It wasn't an abstract concept anymore. It was a place. My place. The next morning, I rented a rugged-looking Jeep from a man named Hank who ran a small garage. He eyed my city shoes with skepticism, but didn't ask questions. Following the clerk's directions, I turned off the paved road onto a gravel track, which then devolved into a rutted, rocky path that wound steeply up into the hills. The Jeep jolted and bounced, and I gripped the steering wheel, my heart in my throat. This was madness. After an hour of white-knuckle driving, the path opened into a small, high valley. A crystal-clear creek, Sage Creek, I presumed wound through it, bordered by aspens whose leaves were just beginning to turn gold. And there, nestled under the shade of a giant ponderosa pine, was a small, dilapidated cabin. My breath caught. I hadn't expected a structure. I killed the engine and stepped out into the silence. It was profound, broken only by the whisper of the wind in the pines and the gurgle of the creek. The air was thin and cold and clean. The cabin was tiny, little more than a shack, built from rough-hewn logs. One window was broken. The door, when I pushed it, swung open with a groan. Inside was a single room, thick with dust and the smell of old wood and mice. There was a rusty wood stove, a crude wooden table, and a bunk bed with a collapsed mattress. In the corner was a pile of rusted tools, picks, a shovel, a sieve. This was it, my mother's heart. The place she had loved and left. The place where a geologist named Arthur had loved her. I walked to the table and brushed away the dust. For a moment, I could almost see them there, young and full of passion, their heads bent over maps and rock samples, dreaming of emeralds and a future together. A wave of emotion, so powerful it buckled my knees, washed over me. It wasn't just sadness. It was a profound sense of connection. I wasn't just running away from Mark. I had run to something. To a legacy of love and lost dreams that was now mine to steward. I spent the day there, cleaning out the cabin as best I could with the tools I found. It was hard, physical labor. My muscles ached, my hands grew raw, but with every sweep of the broom, every spiderweb cleared, I felt like I was clearing out the cobwebs in my own soul. I was not a burden here. I was a caretaker, a pioneer. That night, back in my motel room, sore and exhausted, I felt a peace I hadn't known was possible. It was fragile, but it was real. It was shattered the next morning by a phone call from Eleanor Shapiro. "Ruth," she said, her voice tight, "he's filed a motion to have you declared a missing person." I sat down heavily on the bed. "What?" "He's telling the court he's deeply concerned for your mental state and welfare, that you vanished without a trace, and that he fears you may be a danger to yourself. It's a brilliant, dirty move. It undermines your credibility and puts the focus on your instability." The old fear, the familiar feeling of being trapped and manipulated, surged back. He had found a way to reach me, even here. "What do? We fight it," she said grimly. "I need you to write a formal, sworn declaration. State that you are of sound mind, that you are safe, and that you have relocated temporarily to assess a marital asset, the Sage Creek claim. Provide the address of your motel. We will paint this for what it is, a transparent attempt to harass and control you. But Ruth, this is serious." He's upping the ante. After I hung up, the beautiful peace of the mountains felt like a lie. He was polluting this place, too. I felt the walls closing in. I was hundreds of miles away, and he was still trying to drag me back into his orbit. I spent the rest of the day drafting the declaration, my hand trembling with a mixture of rage and fear. I was not missing. I was not unstable. I was finally, for the first time, found. I emailed the document to Eleanor and then, on impulse, I drove back up to the claim. I needed the silence of the high valley to fortify me. I sat on a log by the creek, the raw emerald pendant cool against my skin, and I watched the water flow over the stones. He thought he could break me with legal maneuvers and psychological warfare. But as I sat there, in the heart of my inheritance, I realized something. He was fighting for money, for control, for his wounded pride. I was fighting for my life. And for the first time, I truly believed that the mountain, and the stubborn, resilient spirit I had inherited from my mother, would be enough to help me win. The aftermath of my escape was messy and frightening, but I was no longer a ghost in my own life. I was here, I was present, and I was ready for the next battle. A declaration, I learned, is a flimsy shield against a well-aimed legal cannon. My sworn statement that I was safe and sane did little to quell the tempest Mark had stirred. The missing person narrative, though quickly debunked by Eleanor, had done its damage. It painted a picture in the court's mind, an erratic wife, fleeing into the wilderness, while a concerned husband waited at home. It was a masterpiece of gaslighting on a legal scale. The hearing for the temporary orders was scheduled via video conference. The Bristlecone Inn had no Wi-Fi, and my phone's hotspot was too unreliable for a legal proceeding. Betty, the motel owner, took one look at my panicked face and gestured with her thumb toward a back room. "Use my office," she grumbled. "Got a hard line in there. Just don't touch my ledgers." And so, on a bright, crisp morning that smelled of pine, I found myself sitting in Betty's cramped, cluttered office, facing a laptop screen that showed a sterile, wood-paneled courtroom hundreds of miles away. On one side of the split screen was Eleanor Shapiro, a stack of files before her, her expression one of calm readiness. On the other was Mark, flanked by his slick attorney, Stephen Thorne. Mark looked good. He was tanned, wearing a perfectly tailored suit, his expression one of pained concern. He had perfected the role of the bewildered, devoted husband. My own reflection in a small corner of the screen looked wild in comparison. My hair was wind-tousled, my skin had a healthy glow from days spent outside, and I was wearing a simple flannel shirt. I looked like what I was, a woman who had left her old life behind. The judge, a weary-looking woman named Judge Nakamura, called the session to order. "Mr. Thorne," she began, "your client has filed a motion for temporary spousal support and exclusive use of the marital home. You may proceed." Thorne stood, oozing confidence. "Thank you, Your Honor. My client, Mr. Walker, is simply seeking to maintain the status quo of the marriage while this unfortunate process plays out. He has been the sole breadwinner for 30 years, and Mrs. Walker's sudden and secretive departure has placed him in a position of having to maintain two households. We are asking for support to be denied and for Mrs. Walker to be ordered to return to the marital home, where she belongs, or to support herself with the business she has flaunted in her filings." He made my life sound like a tantrum. Then he called Mark to the stand. Under Thorne's gentle questioning, Mark was brilliant. He spoke of his shock and heartbreak. He described me as having become withdrawn and secretive, influenced by my eccentric aunts. He mentioned my so-called business with a dismissive wave of his hand. "I supported her hobbies, Your Honor. But this was different. She opened a secret bank account. She was lying to me. I was worried about her mental state. When I confronted her, she became hysterical and walked out." He was so believable. My hands were clenched into fists in my lap. He was taking the truth and twisting it, polishing it into a convincing lie. Then it was Eleanor's turn for cross-examination. She stood slowly, a predator uncoiling. "Mr. Walker, you stated you were the sole breadwinner. Is that accurate?" "Of course," Mark said, a condescending smile playing on his lips. "Who managed all social and domestic affairs for your household for 28 years? The scheduling, the cooking, the cleaning, the entertaining that was crucial for your career advancement." "That was Ruth's role," he conceded. "A role that allowed you to work 80-hour weeks without concern for your home life, correct? A role that, if you had to hire it out, would cost a significant amount of money? A personal chef, a house manager, a social secretary?" "That's a gross exaggeration," Mark scoffed. "Is it?" Eleanor picked up a document. "I have here a declaration from a certified professional life coach detailing the standard market value of such services. Would you like me to enter it into evidence?" Thorne objected. Judge Nakamura overruled. "Answer the question, Mr. Walker." Mark's jaw tightened. "I suppose there is a value. Now," Eleanor continued, her voice like ice, "let's talk about the day Mrs. Walker left. You testified she became hysterical and walked out. Is that correct?" "Yes." "What was the argument about?" "My wife's little business." "Her business," Eleanor repeated. "The one you supported. Did you, in fact, refer to this business as a pathetic fantasy?" "I may have used strong language. I was upset." "Did you call your wife a burden?" The word hung in the digital air. Mark's eyes flickered to the screen, to my face. I stared back, unblinking. I don't recall the specific language." "Let me refresh your memory." Eleanor held up my notebook, open to the page where I had documented that first, devastating overheard conversation. "I have here Mrs. Walker's contemporaneous log, where she records you telling a friend on the phone that she was, and I quote, a permanent responsibility, like an old dog that can't do tricks anymore. Does that sound like the language of a supportive husband?" Mark had gone pale. "That was a private conversation." "One that your wife overheard." "A conversation that, according to her log, shattered her perception of her marriage." "Now, on the day of the final argument, did you or did you not demand she shut down her business and hand over the money she had earned?" "She was using marital funds. She was using her skill and labor," Eleanor shot back. "And when she refused to hand over her earnings, did you or did you not tell her to get out of my house?" The silence in the virtual courtroom was absolute. Mark looked trapped. I was angry. "I didn't mean it." "But you said it. And she left. You didn't call her. You didn't go after her. You let your wife, whom you claim to have been so worried about, walk out into a rainstorm." Is that the action of a concerned husband, or is it the action of a man who wanted to punish his wife for asserting a sliver of independence? Thorne was on his feet, objecting loudly. The video feed became a chaotic mess of overlapping voices. I sat in Betty's quiet office, my heart pounding. Eleanor was eviscerating him. She was taking my pain, my carefully documented evidence, and she was using it as a weapon. It was brutal. It was necessary. It was justice. When the hearing concluded, Judge Nakamura made her rulings from the bench. Her voice was tired but firm. Based on the evidence presented, the court finds that Mr. Walker's behavior contributed significantly to the breakdown of the marriage. The motion to deny spousal support is denied. Mr. Walker is ordered to pay temporary spousal support to Mrs. Walker in the amount of $4,000 per month, retroactive to the date of filing. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. $4,000, it was a lifeline. Regarding the marital home, the judge continued, the court orders that Mrs. Walker has the right to exclusive use and occupancy. However, given her current relocation and Mr. Walker's primary residence being there, he may remain, pending the final settlement. It was a compromise, but it felt like a victory. She had believed me. Finally, Judge Nakamura said, fixing a stern gaze through the screen, this missing person business was a waste of this court's time and resources. It ends now. Counsel, advise your client that further such tactics will be viewed dimly. The screen went black. I sat in the sudden silence of Betty's office, trembling. The legal storm had raged, and I had not been swept away. I had been battered, but I was still standing. More than that, I had been heard. My phone rang. It was Eleanor. We did well, Ruth, she said, a note of satisfaction in her voice. We drew first blood. He knows now that you won't roll over. The real war, the discovery process, is next. He has to open his books, all of them. I thanked her and hung up. I walked out of the office into the brilliant mountain Sunday. The air felt different, lighter. The $4,000 a month was more than just money. It was validation. It was the court officially declaring that my contribution to our 28-year marriage had value, that I had value. I got into my rented Jeep and drove up to the claim. I needed to be there, on my land, with the evidence of my mother's own hidden strength all around me. As I stood by the creek, the legal phrases echoed in my mind. Sole breadwinner, contemporaneous log, exclusive use. They were the dry, clinical terms for a life of quiet servitude and explosive betrayal. But they were also the tools of my liberation. The storm wasn't over. I knew Mark would be furious. He would fight harder, dirtier. But as I looked out at the rugged, unyielding beauty of my mountain, I knew I had the higher ground, both literally and figuratively. The battle had been joined, and for the first time, I was winning. The $4,000 a month was a ceasefire, not a peace treaty. It allowed me to breathe, to stop the frantic calculations about how long my savings would last. I rented a small, furnished cabin on the outskirts of Independence, a step up from the motel, with a real kitchen and a porch that looked out onto the mountains. I bought a used four-wheel drive truck with cash, a reliable beast that could handle the climb to my claim. I was putting down roots, however tentative. My life settled into a new, strange rhythm. Mornings were for heirloom recipes, my connection to the world beyond the valley. Afternoons were for the claim. I'd drive up the rough track, the dust pluming behind me, and spend hours working on the cabin. I patched the roof with sheets of tin, replaced the broken window, and slowly, painstakingly, cleared the land around it. The physical labor was a purge. With every swing of the axe, I felt like I was hacking away at the remnants of my old, powerless self. Eleanor's piranha prediction about discovery proved accurate. The process was a brutal invasion. Mark was forced to disclose every financial statement, every investment, every stock option, every debt. Boxes of documents were delivered to Eleanor's office, and she, in turn, sent curated, maddeningly complex packets to me. "Look for anomalies, Ruth," she instructed during our weekly calls. "Unexplained transfers, large cash withdrawals, accounts you don't recognize." It was like trying to read a language I didn't understand. The numbers swam before my eyes. But I was stubborn. I spread the papers out on my small kitchen table, my mother's emerald pendant around my neck, a talisman of hidden truth. I cross-referenced dates, made notes, and slowly, a picture began to emerge. It was a picture of staggering wealth, most of it locked in investments and trusts with labyrinthine structures. But it was also a picture of control. He had millions, but he'd made sure I felt perpetually on the brink of poverty. Meanwhile, Mark's counterattack through his lawyer was relentless. Stephen Thorne deposed Grace and Clara, trying to paint them as manipulative spinsters. He filed motion after motion, trying to get my spousal support reduced, to force me to return for a psychological evaluation, to have my business records subpoenaed to prove it was a hobby. It was a war of attrition designed to exhaust me financially and emotionally. The emerald claim was my sanctuary from it all. I'd started taking rock samples from the creek bed, filling old mason jars with gravel and sediment, a nod to my mother's geological past. It felt like a connection to her, a quiet homage. I had no intention of actually mining. The claim's value to me was its peace, its wild beauty. It was my mother's true inheritance, a place to heal. One afternoon, I was showing the claim to Betty, who had become a gruff but loyal friend. She was poking around the old tools with a practical eye. "Your mom and her fellow were serious, weren't they?" she said, hefting a rusted pickaxe. "This is good steel. Not some tourist junk." She pointed to a discoloration on a rock face near the creek. "See that? That's quartz. Often found near other stuff. Your emeralds, if they're here, they'll be in pegmatite veins. Like big, igneous dikes. Your fellow would have been looking for those." I stared at her. "How do you know that?" She shrugged. "Grew up here. My daddy was a prospector. Not for gems, for gold. Same principles." She squinted at the mountain. "He ever file an official assessment work report with the BLM? They have to show they're doing active work to hold the claim. Those records are public. Might be something in there. Karma, I've come to believe, is not a cosmic scorekeeper who doles out punishments and rewards with divine precision. It's more like geology. It's the immense, slow, grinding pressure of cause and effect. You build your life on a fault line of lies and cruelty, and eventually, the ground is going to shake. The revelation of the emerald claim was the initial, massive tremor. But the final, collapsing aftershock came from a fault line of Mark's own making. In the weeks following the settlement conference, a strange, brittle silence fell over the legal proceedings. The constant barrage of motions from Thorne ceased. Eleanor reported that they had hired a team of mining engineers and geologists to appraise the claim, a desperate, expensive attempt to devalue my inheritance. Let them, I thought. They could pick over the mountain with their instruments and their skepticism. It wouldn't change the truth in the bedrock. I was busy living. My life in independence had taken on a satisfying shape. My heirloom recipes business was growing by word of mouth, bringing in a steady, modest income that felt entirely my own. I'd made a few friends in town, Betty the gruff motel owner, Hank, the mechanic, and a few other women, artists and retirees who had also come to the mountains to find a different kind of life. We'd have potlucks where everyone brought a dish with a story, and I felt a sense of community I'd never known in my sterile, perfectly appointed neighborhood. I was up at the claim one afternoon, trying to repair the old wood stovepipe, my hands black with soot, when my phone rang. It was Eleanor. Her voice had a peculiar, almost gleeful edge to it. "Ruth," she said, "you might want to sit down for this. We've just been served with new discovery documents from Thorne. It seems Mark has been creatively managing his finances." "Creatively how?" I asked, wiping my forehead with the back of my wrist. Remember how we could never quite account for a series of large transfers from his business account to a numbered holding company? We assumed it was some complex investment vehicle. Well, it seems the holding company has a name. Sierra Sun Properties. And Sierra Sun Properties owns a very nice, very secluded lake house about 50 miles from here. And according to the property records filed with the transfer, it is owned jointly by Mark Walker and a Miss Jessica Albright. The world tilted. Jessica Albright. The name meant nothing to me. And then, in a sickening rush, it did. Jessica, the bright, young junior partner from his firm. The one he'd mentioned bringing on a few years ago. The one he'd said was a real go-getter. I'd met her once at a company Christmas party. She couldn't have been more than 35. Pretty, ambitious, hanging on his every word. He hadn't just been emotionally and financially abusive. He'd been building a second, secret life. The late nights at the office, the business trips, the emotional distance. It hadn't just been about work or his contempt for me. It had been about her. The lake house explained the missing money. He hadn't been hiding it from me to maintain control. He'd been hiding it to fund his double life. A cold, clear fury washed through me, so pure it felt like ice water in my veins. All his posturing, his wounded pride, his claims of being a devoted husband, it was all a lie. He had been projecting his own guilt, his own infidelities, onto me. "Are you there, Ruth?" Eleanor's voice was careful. "I'm here," I said, my voice strangely calm. "How long?" "The property was purchased 3 years ago." 3 years. He had been calling me a burden, a responsibility, an old dog, while he was playing house with a younger woman on the side. The hypocrisy was so vast, it was almost comical. "This is good, Ruth," Eleanor said, her strategic mind already racing ahead. "This is very good. It gives us leverage. It proves dissipation of marital assets. He used community property funds to buy a house for his mistress. We can go after that asset, and it completely destroys his credibility with the court. The Concerned Husband Act is now officially deceased." I hung up the phone and leaned against the rough logs of the cabin. I looked out at the creek, the sunlight dappling on the water. I thought I would feel a crushing betrayal, a heartbreak to dwarf all others. But I didn't. The love I had for Mark had died a slow, painful death over years, and its corpse had been finally buried the day he threw me out. This new information wasn't a wound, it was a key. It unlocked the final mystery of his cruelty. He hadn't just been a cold man, he had been a guilty one. My very existence, my loyalty, had been a constant, living reproach to his secret life. The karma wasn't just in his affair being discovered. The true karmic twist was in the timing and the location. When Eleanor formally introduced the lake house and Jessica Albright into the court record, it was like throwing a lit match into a room full of gasoline. Mark's carefully constructed facade imploded. His claims of being a wronged, faithful husband were rendered laughable. Judge Nakamura's patience, already thin, evaporated. But the twist of the knife came from an unexpected direction. The town of Independence, it turned out, was a very small world. And the community of people who had fled there to escape something, or to find something, looked out for their own. I was one of them now. A few days after the lake house revelation, Betty came to my cabin, her expression grim. "That lake house," she said without preamble. "Sierra Sun Properties. I know the caretaker. Fella named Joe. He's not fond of your husband. Says he and his lady friend were up there a lot, especially the past few months. Arguing, loudly." My ears pricked up. Arguing? About what? Money, mostly. From what Joe could gather through the windows, he's not proud of it, but the man's a terrible snoop. The young lady was getting impatient. Wanted him to finalize the divorce, wanted a guarantee of her share. She was under the impression he was much, much wealthier than he apparently is. Betty gave a dry, rasping chuckle. Turns out, maintaining 2 households and a mistress is expensive, even for a big-shot financier. Especially when his cash cow you stopped producing. She handed me a folded piece of paper. Joe wrote down what he heard the last time they were there, just before your husband left for good. Said you might find it useful. I unfolded the paper. The handwriting was clumsy. It was a fragment of conversation, but it was damning. Jessica, you said this would be over by now. I'm not waiting forever, Mark. I'm not living in this shadow. Mark, it's complicated. The lawyers. Jessica, I don't care about the lawyers. You promised me a life. You said she was nothing. A burden you were going to shed, so shed her, or I'm gone. A burden you were going to shed, the same word. The word he'd used to his friend on the phone. The word that had started it all. He had used it to her too. He had reduced our 28-year marriage, my entire existence, to a problem he was going to shed. And in doing so, he had given me, and the court, the final, irrefutable piece of evidence of his character. I gave the note to Eleanor. She entered it into evidence as proof of his intent to dissipate assets and his malicious mindset. Peace, I discovered, is not the absence of noise. It's the presence of a harmony so deep that the noise simply doesn't matter anymore. It's the sound of a crackling fire in my own wood stove, the whisper of wind through the pines that are now my neighbors, the gurgle of the creek that is the soundtrack to my days. This is the legacy my mother left me. Not the emeralds, not the money from the sale of the Crestview house, but this profound, unshakable quiet at the center of my being. It's been a year since the divorce was finalized. The dust has long since settled. The large cash settlement sits in a diversified investment portfolio managed by a financial advisor who speaks to me with respect and explains every decision in plain English. I am, by any measure, a wealthy woman. But the money feels secondary, almost incidental. It's a tool, a comfort, a security blanket. The real wealth was earned with blistered hands and a mended spirit here on this mountain. My cabin is no longer a dilapidated shack. With the help of Hank and a few other locals, I've made it sturdy and warm. It has a new metal roof, proper insulation, and a small solar array that powers my laptop and a few lights. It's still simple, one room, with a loft for my bed, but it is wholly, completely mine. Every nail I helped hammer, every coat of stain I brushed on, was a declaration of independence. The Sage Creek claim is now the Sage Creek Sanctuary. I have no intention of turning it into a mine. The thought of tearing open the earth for its jewels feels like a violation of the peace it has given me. Instead, I've turned it into a private retreat. Sometimes, I host Grace here for a week at a time. She sits on the porch, wrapped in one of my grandmother's quilts, sipping tea and declaring the air a tonic for the soul. Clara visits too, her sharp eyes missing nothing, approving of the solidity of the roof, the efficiency of the wood stove. She calls it my command post. My business, Heirloom Recipes, has blossomed in a way I never could have imagined. It's no longer just a side project. I've published 2 beautiful, hardbound community cookbooks featuring stories and recipes from the people right here in Independence and the surrounding valleys. They've sold thousands of copies. I have a waiting list of clients from all over the country who want their family culinary histories preserved. The work is a joy. It connects me to people, to their stories of love and loss and celebration, and in doing so, it has woven me into the rich tapestry of human connection I had been missing for so long. I heard through the grapevine, as one does in a small town linked to a big city, that Mark and Jessica did not last 6 months after the divorce. The relationship, built on secrecy and the thrill of the forbidden, couldn't survive the harsh light of day and the reality of his diminished finances. Karma, it seems, is thorough. He still has his career, his big house, but I know now that those things were never the source of his misery. His emptiness came from within, and no amount of external validation could ever fill it. I feel no hatred for him anymore. just a distant, quiet pity. He is a lesson I had to learn, not a life sentence I had to serve. Today is a bright, cold day. The aspen trees are a blaze of gold against the deep green of the pines. I'm sitting on the porch, the emerald pendant uncut, unpolished, exactly as my mother left it resting against my flannel shirt. I'm wrapping up a very special project. It's a cookbook of my own, not for a client. For me. It's filled with my mother's recipes, Grace's, Clara's, and the new ones I've collected here. But it's more than that. In the margins, I've been writing my story. Not for publication, but for me. For David, someday, if he wants to understand. It's my heirloom. A car I don't recognize rumbles up the dirt track. It's a rental SUV. It parks, and the door opens. David gets out. My breath catches. He's been up here a handful of times over the past year, our relationship mending slowly, carefully. But this visit is a surprise. He looks older, more settled. He smiles, a real, easy smile, as he walks toward the porch. Hey, Mom. David, this is a wonderful surprise. I stand and hug him tightly. He feels solid, real. I had some time off, he says, leaning against the porch rail and looking out at the view. And I wanted to talk to you about something. Away from everything. We sit on the porch steps, a blanket over our knees, mugs of hot coffee in our hands. The silence between us is comfortable now, not strained. Chloe and I are engaged, he says, his voice quiet, a little nervous. Tears of pure, uncomplicated joy spring to my eyes. Oh, David, that's wonderful news. I hug him again. She's a remarkable woman. She is, he says, beaming. And she adores you. She says you're her role model for being fierce and independent. I laugh, a real, free sound that echoes in the clear air. Well, tell her it's a path I highly recommend. His expression grows more serious. That's what I wanted to talk to you about, Mom, the path. He looks down at his coffee mug. Seeing what Dad did to you, it changed me. It scared me. I never want to make someone feel the way he made you feel. I never want to be that kind of man. My heart aches for him, for the burden of that lesson. Oh, sweetheart, you are not your father. Your heart is nothing like his. The very fact that you're worried about it proves that. I know, he says, looking up at me, his eyes, my eyes, full of a new depth. But watching you walk away, and then build this. He gestures at the cabin, the mountain, the whole stunning expanse of my life. It showed me what real strength is. It's not about dominating or controlling. It's about having the courage to be yourself, no matter what. You taught me that it's never too late to choose happiness. To choose yourself. We sit there for a long time, talking about his plans, about Chloe, about the future. It is a perfect, golden afternoon, a thread of healing and love woven into the fabric of my new life. After he leaves, promising to bring Chloe up soon, the quiet settles back around me, deeper and richer than before. I look out at the land, my land, and I think about the legacy my mother left me. She thought she was leaving me emeralds, a fortune to secure my future. But she left me so much more. She left me a story of a love so great it made her hide from her own power. And in doing so, she gave me the key to finding mine. The sun begins to dip behind the highest peaks, painting the sky in shades of violet and rose. I go inside and light the oil lamp on my table. The flame dances, casting a warm golden glow on the simple, sturdy room. So, this is my story. From a gilded cage to a mountain sanctuary. From a whispered burden to a woman who owns her name, her past, and her future. The journey was more painful than I could have ever imagined, and more beautiful than I ever dared to dream. And if you're listening to this, if you're out there feeling unseen, unheard, or undervalued, trapped in a life that feels too small for your spirit, then please, listen to the lesson an old woman learned on a mountain. Your worth is not a negotiation. It is a fact, As solid as stone and as brilliant as an uncut gem, you are not a burden. You are a soul, with a light that is yours alone to shine. Do not be afraid of the silence, for it is in the quiet that you will hear your own true voice. And do not ever, ever be afraid to walk through the rain to find your own sunshine. It is never, ever too late to become the woman you were always meant to be. The fire crackles, the wind sings its ancient song in the pines, and I, Ruth, am finally, completely at home. Up next, 2 more incredible stories are waiting for you right on your screen. If you enjoyed this one, you won't want to miss these. Just click to watch and don't forget to subscribe.